University at the Department of Performing Arts and Film. Makerere is found in Kampala, the capital city of Uganda, in the eastern part of the African continent. Actually, we are neighbors with Kenya, we are neighbors with Tanzania, we are close to South Sudan and also DRC. So there is a country called Uganda in the middle there. As an ethnomusicologist, I have worked with the archive here at Makerere University, collecting and documenting material from different Ugandan communities. I have also participated in projects where the archive has repatriated material back to communities where such items were collected. However, since 2014, I have worked on indigenous approaches to archiving music, and as you can see from my article, which I shared sometime, I have investigated how the process of composing and performing music becomes the process of collecting, documenting, showcasing, and transmitting significant information about landslide disasters in Uganda, and here in a district called Bududa. So my talk today is about the same theme, with the topic for my presentation being musicians as community archives, historicizing Bududa landslide disasters since 1970. Where do I get the slide? So in Uganda, when someone mentions the name Bududa, it is as if the person is evoking the word landslide, which in simple terms refers to the movement of rocks, earth, or debris down a slope. Bududa is one of the districts found along the slopes of Mount Elgon in eastern Uganda, and is mainly occupied by the Bagisu, people of the Bantu family, who are also known as the Bamasaba. Much as the residents of Bududa have experienced landslides since time immemorial, written records show that this disaster heightened in 1970. This is attributed to increased population in the area, which has forced people to encroach on wetlands and forests for farming and settlement. In 1970, many landslides happened, including one in the current sub-county of Bushii that killed over 60 people performing Imbalu circumcision rituals. Many other landslides have happened since that time, leading to death of several people, displacement of others, and destruction of property. Apart from resettling survivors to safer places, the Ugandan government and other stakeholders give families that lose relatives money to help in burial expenses. Moreover, the injured are always evacuated to hospitals and sometimes given financial assistance for medical care. Food and water are also provided to survivors, in addition to encouraging those staying in risky areas to relocate to safer places. Despite such interventions, very little success is registered. The question that comes to mind is, does this state of affairs exist because authorities lack historical information to inform mitigation measures? This is the main question that motivated me to conduct my research. Like they sing about love, family affairs, and political issues, several musicians in Bududa district draw on landslides as material for their compositions. In singing about landslides, such musicians implicitly engage in processes of collecting, preserving, showcasing, and transmitting important historical information about landslides. In this case, one would say that musicians participate in archiving landslide disasters in Bududa. However, one may also ask the question, how can musicians represent archives? Considering landslides in Bududa, which specific collections do these musicians accumulate about these disasters? How do these musicians open their archives to ensure that other community members access and use items they accumulate over time? My research also at the National Archives of Uganda. Also, another place I have done research is the Uganda Broadcasting Corporation, which is called UBC Archive. I have also done research in several private archives. So my research in those places demonstrates that there are very, very scanty records on Bududa landslides. Under such a context, how can government agencies and NGOs access and use accumulated archives by musicians through the songs they create and perform to inform their work in Bududa and other parts of Uganda? That is the question I want to ask. So these are the questions I discuss in my paper by presenting musicians as archives that do not only collect information about landslides and transform it into song, but also preserve, showcase, and transmit it during beer parties, funeral rites, and other contexts. I highlight the nature of material contained in such archives. I also demonstrate why such materials should be accessed and harnessed by government agencies and NGOs to inform interventions for mitigating landslides in Bududa and other parts of Uganda. I just want to mention that while several scholars have defined the term archive, mainly looking at it as an institution for the collection, cataloging, and preservation of government records, Achilles Mbembe 2002 asserts that no definition of the archive excludes two variables: the physical space for safeguarding material and the material in such spaces. Despite this view about archives, Carol Muller, in her work of 2002 about archiving Africanness in sacred song, argues that we should not locate the idea of the archive only in, I want to quote, cultures with technologies of repetition, such as writing, sound recording, and film, close quote. And I use the term memory when making reference to oral or pre-literate communities. Muller observes that an archive should be considered as any mechanism through which societies ensure that items of value in their midst are safeguarded for other people in future. She cites song composition as an example of the archive, a means of depositing and preserving ideas for future retrieval and use by the musicians. As she observes, even what we call ephemeral performances can act as platforms where certain communities retrieve, assemble, and transmit important information for both current and future generations. Following Muller's viewpoints, I also present musicians in Bududa as archives who collect, document, preserve, showcase, and transmit important information about landslides under conditions of very scant information held by both public and private archival institutions. The main argument advanced in this paper is that archives are a representation of history because they take custody of historical material. Talking about historical material is affirming the view about archives as spaces where items collected in the past are held to be accessed and used by both the present and future generations. Similarly, I deploy the term historical to assert that the act of collecting and safeguarding suggests that whatever is deposited in archives turns into historical material from the moment the collector hands it over to the archivist. Because archives are not sites where knowledge is merely extracted, but act as arbiters and negotiators of knowledge production. And here I'm quoting someone called Roskin, 2006. They stand as platforms where different actors can interact to reread past history in order to understand the present and predict the future. In addition to Bududa, interacting with musicians to listen to landslide songs is to understand processes of creating this archive, the type of material it contains, and how to access and use it. I just want to make some comments about methodology here. Writing about archiving Filipino-American music in Los Angeles, Roskin 2006 points out that the methodology one adopts to collect material is crucial in determining the meaning of the archive. As a means of addressing real and perceived power inequalities inherent in the project of archiving, Roskin calls for collaborative archiving because, among others, it engenders, I want to quote him direct here, it engenders dialogue which let me go back a bit, because it engenders, the quote begins from dialogue, which involves establishing rapport and building trust through the open exchange of ideas and the mediation of conflicts, end quote. And this is quoted on page 3 of Roskin's work of 2006. While conducting fieldwork, I was aware of the fact that in this ethnomusicological study, unequal power structures are bound to exist between the researcher and the musicians. Moreover, because musicians deal with an oral resource, it is inevitable for them to forget certain information that relates to the landslides they sing about. As such, I adopted a methodology that facilitates remembering through cultivating rapport and listening to as many of the musicians' stories as possible. As I have already mentioned, landslides in Bududa have led to death, destruction of property, and displacement of people. Some women survivors narrated to me how they lost their marriages because their husbands ran away after losing the land and other means of livelihood. In addition to looking at me as someone getting their secrets, some of these women had developed a very negative attitude towards men. Consequently, to conduct research on such a topic has the potential to rekindle emotional wounds that the victims are healing. How does a researcher ensure that people share experiences about landslides without re-traumatizing them? Through the questions he or she asks. To avoid re-traumatizing my informants, I ensured that I do not ask them to narrate how they feel after losing their loved ones. Moreover, I assured those who could feel insecure that the information they were offering is not going to be used against them, that I was going to share it through my academic report, which has potential to positively influence policy on landslides and other natural disasters in Uganda. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how the nature of these songs. Due to their sorrowful nature, songs about landslides possess similar characteristic features. Like the Kadongo Kamu music discussed by Nanyonga Tamsuza in her works of 2002 and 2006, the performer is usually one, despite sometimes accompanied by another musician. The main musician sings and plays an instrument, in most cases the guitar, tube fiddle, and a wooden trough. The accompanying musician normally plays shakers or the flute to help in keeping the beat. Because of being narrative in nature, these songs are suitable for listening in order for the audience to grasp the stories they put forward. Returning to our question of archiving landslides through the activities of musicians, how do they do it? How do they do it? My study has revealed that the act of collecting information to compose these songs also translates into efforts of creating inventories about landslides and issues surrounding them. If this is the case, which items are these musicians putting in this inventory? The first item is usually the background to the landslide in question. This includes the name of the landslide, the place where it occurred, and the time, including the hour, date, month, and year. The musician also mentions the dead and survivors, the property that got destroyed, sometimes going to the extent of making recommendations about what he or she thinks should be done to stop the occurrence of this disaster. So I think before we proceed, if you allow me, I want to play a few of those songs so that you can hear. You can hear what they sing about. Of course, I will interpret because I am sure you cannot understand the language. So let me share the clips.
Video.
Okay.
Video.
I'm praying so hard that they are able to play. Are you able to see something on the screen? Oh, okay. Let's go on where?
The papers not be seen. The papers, don't lift them so much, they may be seen in the camera. The length. That's enough. If it is. Is it going through the 3 minutes? 3 minutes.
I think that is enough for that one. Let me play the second one. Then I'm going to interpret, to talk about all of them. That is the first song. I'm now going to play the second one. I have three clips. It is share. Are you able to see something on the screen? Okay. I think because of time, let me now play the last clip. I hope you are able to see something on the screen. Okay, I think let me now go back. We got share?
Sure.
Let me go back to this.
Basic.
Okay, this one. Where at?
Selecting now. Okay. Yeah.
So, I had wanted to play something by women, but somehow I don't know whether I lost my external hard drive where I had put all the information, but I know when we meet next time, I will show you something about that. So in the first song, this guy is called Petero Luholo. He's singing about a landslide which took place in Bududa in 1997. He is mentioning the specific places where it happened. He narrates how things unfolded, talking about the people who died, the property that was destroyed, and the kind of aid that was given to the survivors. So that is the kind of inventory he is creating about that landslide of 1997. And the local people, when I was doing research, they call it by the name of the place, that specific village where it took place. So the 1997 landslide in Bududa, the main landslide which took place that year, is called the landslide of Buali. Locally it is called Ingururwe Buali. In the second song, the same musician is singing about resettlement outside Bududa, and he is giving the government advice on what should be done. His advice is that people who migrate from Bududa do not prosper where they settle, because ancestors do not feel happy. So he is imploring the government to find land within Bududa for the landslide survivors. There is a lot of debate about resettlement, and here musicians are creating information. They are in terms of giving advice to these people. In song number 3, the musician called Patrick Shimali sings about the 2010 landslide that occurred in a place called Nametsi. This landslide killed about 300 people and left about 500 people homeless. So in the song, he mentions the day and time when the landslide took place and lists the property that was destroyed. He talks about a health center, a school, shops, and a church. He adds that many people who could not be counted perished in the landslide, and actually up to now, many relatives have not gotten their family members. And he also talks about those who were resettled in other parts of Uganda. So those are the kind of inventories I'm talking about, that musicians are using their songs to create inventories about these landslides. So the process of composing songs about landslides represents the initial stages of collecting and documenting archival material. During this process, musicians create inventories through which they capture salient information about the landslide in question. Anthony Seeger, 1986, argues that archival holdings are not created and safeguarded for their own sake. They should be made available to users to positively impact on their day-to-day lives. To make the archival process complete, these musicians ensure that they take advantage of existing contexts to perform the songs to community members in order to make the latter access and consume them. There are several contexts which offer space for these performances: drinking places, funeral rites, and political meetings. What I consider as drinking places are meetings where people gather to take beer or any form of alcohol as a group. Like other African social gatherings, including work, entertainment, and ritual, as discussed by Agao in his book of 2016, situations involving drinking are integrated with music and dancing. While people in Bududa also play pre-recorded music during beer parties, there are bars that hire musicians to perform live music accompanied by guitars and tube fiddles. In Bududa, some of the music performed during these occasions are related to landslides. Unlike beer parties where people gather to drink, funeral rites are situations for mourning and paying last respects to the deceased. As Agao 2016 also notes, the nature of function organized to send off someone is dependent on age and social status. This assertion suggests that children and ordinary people receive less elaborate burial ceremonies than adults. Moreover, chiefs and wealthy people are honored with rituals that may last several days or even weeks. These ceremonies are punctuated with musical performances. To say that funeral rites in Bududa also attract musicians who play songs, including those associated with landslides, is to underscore the significance of such ceremonies in offering a platform to showcase and transmit information about the landslide disaster. The last occasion where landslide songs are a common feature in Bududa is political gatherings. These are meetings where political leaders gather either to sensitize the population about government programs or even seek for political support during an election. Besides usually performing a certain music called kadodi as a tool of mobilization, songs about landslides are also performed. As someone may ask, how do musicians perform their songs about, why do musicians perform their songs about landslides during these occasions? Something that implicitly translates into showcasing and transmitting such materials. So I am just sharing briefly some of the reasons why musicians perform their songs about landslides during burial, beer parties, and also political meetings. So several reasons account for these performances. When a fresh landslide occurs, these songs are performed to mark a moment of mourning for both the victims of the fresh landslide and those who died in earlier landslides. I want to quote a small excerpt from an interview I had with one of the musicians in March, after the landslide of March 2010. This musician told me the following. I'm quoting him direct. When a disaster like this happens, we sing about it. Besides coming up with new songs, we play those created earlier whenever we have an opportunity, in drinking places, when interacting with our political leaders, and many others. But more importantly, we sing the songs also when another landslide occurs, especially while mourning the dead. We don't only mourn the victims of the current landslide, but also those who perished in previous landslides. It makes us remember them. This interview was conducted on Tuesday, 16th March 2010, very many years ago. These archives are also opened to remind people who promise assistance to fulfill their promises. This normally happens when these songs are performed during political meetings. This idea was raised by Peter Luholo, the gentleman who played in the first song, by pointing out that, I am quoting him directly here, he said that they promise and go away. We wait and nothing comes up. When we play the songs, during moments when we meet, we tell them, meaning we tell the political leaders, that you promised such and such a thing, but it has not arrived. What can we do? And this was an interview I had on Friday, 15th October 2021. Lastly, the purpose of sharing the songs is to implore survivors to move from risky areas to those that are safer. Despite Luholo singing against resettlement outside Bududa, as I have already illustrated, other musicians supported the idea of resettling landslide survivors outside the district. A number of them based their views on inadequate land for resettlement in Bududa. They contended that it is better to force, I am putting force in quotes, to force oneself to get acclimatized to new places than staying in risky areas only to be buried by landslides. If musicians can boast of substantial amounts of historical information, as I have demonstrated, then it is prudent that government agencies, NGOs, and other stakeholders make use of them as sources of material for their landslide mitigation programs. And I'm soon coming to the conclusion, please. Don't worry, I'm almost coming to the conclusion. So how and why should authorities access and use these archives? How can they do it, and why should they do it? So the crucial question surrounding landslides in Bududa is whether these disasters will be overcome or not? Many people are asking questions. Are we really going to come out of these disasters? Much as so many interventions are put in place, this issue arises because since interventions were effected more than 4 decades ago, very little success has been registered. So, despite survivors of the 2010 Namets landslide being resettled in Panyadoli, adjacent to Kriandongo refugee camp in southwestern Uganda, there have been constant media reports that most of them abandoned the settlement and came back to Bududa. These people usually cite inadequate social amenities, including schools and hospitals, as well as hostile host communities, as the main cause of their return to their previous homes. And I'm also putting the word homes in quotes, because the homes were really destroyed. So if they are coming, they are not getting the homes as they used to be. So when more survivors were displaced between 2012 and 2020, and were resettled in Bunambutie, that is in Bulambuli district, information about the abandonment of this settlement due to harsh climatic conditions has also become a common narrative in Bududa. Moreover, as my colleague called Hanakwa in 2022 has noted, competing land claims in Bunambutie, where different parties fight over the same plot of land, have made some landslide survivors feel insecure. Will they be evicted over time because the land they occupy is not theirs? This question is the root cause of such fears. The other burning issue is corruption. In addition to confiscating relief items, Bududa district local government officials and staff from the office of the Prime Minister have been accused of cooking up lists of the dead and survivors in order to get more funds from the government. This and other issues have hampered efforts towards the mitigation of landslides in Bududa. And actually, the musicians sing about all these things, especially the question of corruption. So I'm now talking about how to use the archives. To underscore Roskin's idea on the role of archives, as I have already pointed out, we need to consider archives as not only as minefields of knowledge, but also as spaces where knowledge is arbitrated and negotiated. In this case, archives are platforms where different people can interact to understand the nature of material they hold and how such material can be used to solve the challenges they confront in their day-to-day lives. In this case, I also urge that there is need for government agencies and stakeholders involved in establishing measures to mitigate landslides challenges in Bududa to consider musicians as an alternative source of information that can inform interventions created to curb landslides in Bududa and other parts of Uganda. What these people should do is to establish avenues where they can ask musicians to perform songs about landslides, to list the messages they carry. This process also requires engaging these musicians to talk about their songs, what their songs imply during contexts like seminars, in order to understand the information they contain. As Reyes, is a scholar called Adelaida Reyes, 1999 has written in relation to Vietnamese refugees in the US, contexts where survivors feel insecure to use direct speech to air out their grievances compel these people to resort to music as an alternative tool of communication. This is the scenario witnessed among the Bududa landslide survivors in Uganda, sometimes disguised as entertaining their audiences in the various contexts where they perform. They use music to talk about resettlement and corruption. In some instances, their songs detail the interventions made and which successes were registered and the aspects of the interventions that failed. As such, working with musicians avails authorities with essential historical material that can be harnessed to address these issues. Thank you so much for listening to me. May God bless you so much. Thank you.
Can you hear me, Dr. Makwa?
Yes. I'm able to hear you very, very well.
Excellent. So thank you so much. That, your work is so important and so creative as well. I always really love to hear how you connect, the sort of traditional field of ethnomusicology to the traditional field of archives, and look at that with context of the newer relations about community engagement. And I particularly appreciate how you are able to relate this to these both local and global concerns, such as population displacement, gendered issues with records and whose memories are captured and whose are listened to, and climate change as well. I mean, this is incredibly important, and it seems to me you have a model here that we could be using in so many other places too, where some of the same factors are at work. And your last slide, I think, about minefields, strikes me that actually, we could use that term in both directions. Both minefields as tremendous resources, mines that could be tapped, but also, I suspect, for officials to think about it as, the archive, if it's admitted, can be quite dangerous because it holds officials to account for corruption and failed programs. And that always speaks to the nature of archives. So these archives are not only sources of evidence, they're definitely sources that they're forms of accountability, insisting on accountability from officials too. So I just think this is absolutely wonderful work. And I'm wondering if people in the classroom here, or those of you who are on Zoom, would like to ask some questions. You can either ask directly if you wish, or you can put them in the chat, and let me put my glasses on so I can actually see what is being said here. So this is a question from Jose. How does one become a musician and gain legitimacy within the community? Okay. So who has standing to make these songs and to play these songs?
I'm missing something in your talk.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. You are breaking a bit.
Okay, yes, I know connection's not fantastic. So the question is, how does one become one of these musicians or singers? Who has the authority to take those experiences, translate them into song and perform them?
Yeah, thank you so much. The person who asked is called
Jose.
Jose. Yeah, thank you so much, Jose. Unlike other communities, actually among the Bagisu, we have also some contexts where we commission musicians, but these are not musicians who are like commissioned by the Council of Elders, maybe unlike ritual musicians who sing about ritual issues. Anybody who has the talent to compose the music, to perform it, is free. So there's no criteria that you say people are commissioned. But of course, there are some incidences. Maybe if I got interested, I can commission a musician to perform, to compose a song for me on something. But these ones don't have any special commissioning, saying that maybe someone needs to pass through this kind of process in order to become a musician. What matters is your talent and the way you are able to express yourself. Because in some places, like drinking places, beer parties, people will be interested because they are able to hear that you are able to perform and entertain them, and you have a certain way of crafting the message. So they will, if there are a number of musicians to choose from, they will choose you if you are able to entertain, to craft the message and communicate a certain measure of information. But of course, by merely saying that we want so and so, they are also commissioning, they are also choosing that this is the kind of person who should perform his music before us. So as the professor said, sometimes how able are you to articulate, for example, messages about accountability, especially on the part of political leaders. So especially now, like when it is coming closer to elections, people will want to hear a message about this musician, about this politician who promised something to the landslide survivors, but he never brought what he promised. So by just choosing you to come and perform and give that message, they are also indirectly commissioning you for the performances. I don't know if I have answered something.
Absolutely. I think you clarified there are traditional musicians that also that elders may appoint or work with the elders, and then, but in this case, any musician who can perform can do so and has voice to talk about their experiences.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of questions here. So maybe let me just backtrack and I'll go through the ones on the chat and then I'll come to the classroom. Okay. So I missed out Blair's question here, but Blair wants to know how receptive the government is to these songs and to seeing them basically as archives of experience, especially if they're not necessarily what the government wants to hear.
Yeah, as I said in during the presentation, the government has tried so many ways of how to mitigate the landslide. As I speak, they are somehow, when you look at what is going on, it is as if the government is saying, let's now open up and look at the different alternative ways of how to solve this problem. One of my friends was presenting a paper and I was talking about how people are using the spiritual kind of interventionists to mitigate landslides in this community. So the government is really not against this kind of communication, but of course some people are feeling very, very uncomfortable about the kind of messages which are presented through the songs, especially the political elites. But the government on the surface is moving around, encouraging people to really give opinions about how this problem can be solved out. And the musicians have been very, very, very much at the forefront of doing this. So I would say the government is not against it, apart from some of those few individuals who feel very, very uncomfortable, especially when they are put to task to account for what they are supposed to do.
Excellent, thank you. There's a question here from Alicia, and I guess it's a personal question. Is your interest, did it come first in music or in archives? I think I know the answer, but let you answer.
First in I am a trained musician. I did my bachelor's in music, as the professor said. I also did the master's in music and also the PhD in music. So I think I had a lot of interest in archiving music during my MA master's program, because at undergraduate we never had courses in music archiving. People who do archiving are people who do information science and library studies, something like that. So when I was introduced to archiving at master's, I really picked a lot of interest in archives. There was someone who talked about women.
Yes, that is Joey, and Joey picked up on, you mentioned this in your slides, but I think Joey would like to hear some more about women maybe being less trusting of men, and of course you're a man who's trying to record women's songs, which is difficult, I think. And that's what Joey's asking. Is it harder for you or for others maybe, but for you in particular, to record women who are performing the songs?
Actually, most of them, as I said, were very, very uncomfortable, because especially when I go to those displaced people's camps, I managed to convince them and recorded some of the songs. But especially those who were able to come out openly. But those who were hesitating, I was also very hesitant to push them. So, speaking the truth, I had so few songs performed by women landslide survivors, especially as individual musicians, but I collected a lot about men and men groups. So it is also very true that because of that, most of them didn't open up to allow me record their songs. Most of them didn't allow. Because whenever I was meeting women, they would tell me that, we really feel very insecure, you men. So sometimes I was taking a lot of time to explain that, you see, even in my family, I have also been affected by landslides. I have lost many relatives. I have lost many friends. We have lost property. And actually, in 2010, our home became like a settlement camp. Like many community members came and stayed there. So, by talking about men being liars, I'm very sorry about this because the context you are in is so different from our context here. Because for us here in, especially the community I come from, the society is so patriarchal that most of the provisions are given by men. So women depend so much on men. I'm very sure it is not the case in Los Angeles there and America generally. But for us here, men are the providers. They are the breadwinners. So when this disaster happened, most of the men, because land also is a very, very serious factor of production. If you lose land, it means the source of livelihood is lost. So the men running away is like they are abandoning these women in the open without anywhere to turn to. So they have been surviving on handouts from NGOs, from government agencies. But as I also mentioned, these handouts, when they come through the district local government. And these people also take it away. So you can now see how the problem is complicated by so many intermingling factors. So, yeah, there was a lot of bitterness, especially from the women.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for your frankness there, too. And I think that addresses some of Alexander's questions as well. In other contexts, we would say that your own personal experiences become important to relate, or if they're not known by the communities you're working with, to build trust between you and them, but also in other circumstances here, for example, where we do have a lot of women activists, then it's a situation where you could turn to somebody else to work with the women, but you don't have that. You're a very unusual individual in Uganda, so that's not available to you to do that kind of work. We have one more question in the chat I wanted to get to, and then I think there are one or two in the classroom here as well. So Joseph asks whether geologists have looked at these songs and their content. Have they recognized that these might contain important information?
Actually, I don't want to say that I am the first person to work on this, because you never know, maybe there are some other people somewhere whom I don't know. But the issue of music, songs, and mitigation of landslides is not something people have really talked about. So it is my hope that other people will get interested and maybe begin looking at music, songs, dances, etc. as a source of information. And maybe geologists may be among those people. Thank you so much, Joseph. It is the prayer for all of us in the room that they also find this important for their work. And when I talk about the government agencies, I talk about NGOs, I'm actually also including people like geologists, maybe religious leaders, anthropologists, sociologists, and very, very many others. Yeah.
Okay. I think we've one question at least in the classroom, and I'm going to ask my colleague here to speak up, and then I'll speak into the microphone. Maybe that's the easiest way to do this. So,
Oh, you increase the volume. Increase your volume.
Receptive to the work, or more perceptive than others, and how did you navigate that interview process?
okay, so the question was about actually, interviewing musicians before you recorded them. How easy was it to talk to them and explain what you were going to do and to navigate that process? Because I imagine many people don't really have a sense of archives, right? Would not even really understand why would you want to record these songs?
Yeah, I was reading somewhere that many people have bombarded those villages, researchers with their machines, recording people. So the community members have become a bit very alert about what goes on. And back home here in Uganda, there's a lot of censorship. You don't just wake up and you go to a community to begin doing research, even if you are a member of that community. So you must first get permission from different authorities, in addition to the permission from the research clearance offices. So when I reach there, I make sure that I first explain to them what I'm doing. Some of those who are able to read and write, I show them the documents, because you see, part of the research was done in settlements. In those places where the survivors are taken for resettlement. So you must reach there and introduce yourself to the management, to the authorities of the settlement. Then you explain yourself to them. Then you meet the groups. You first prepare them, talk to them about what you are doing. Then you ask, I would first ask them, conduct interviews with them. Then when they perform the songs to me, I also ask other questions. I organize another session of questions and ask about what they have sung about. So then I would go back after analyzing the data. I would go back, I would call them and go back again. Sometimes they could perform the same song more than once because I would come and say, hey, this song you talked about ABCD, but maybe can you perform it again? Then they explain some of the things which I missed during the first interview. That was the kind of process I was following. First explaining, then I engage in interviews, they perform the songs, I go again into the interviews, then if there is something I need to clarify, I would go back to the community or to the camp, the resettlement, and they do the performance again. And I'm even planning to if I get time, I want to go back to those communities as a way of taking back the information, the recordings I made, to play back some of those recordings as a way of repatriation, and maybe gather more ideas about what they sang about. Sometimes some of the people I may meet during this phase of study may be some of those people who are not there. So if I play some of these songs, maybe they can give me some of their own advice, some of their comments, and I record them again. They can even sing similar songs, and I collect more data. Maybe I see how to create another publication out of this. Yeah.
So thank you. That was a really full explanation. It was a great question, actually, because it illustrates how much process you have to go through, even, to get what we would say entree, not even just to build trust, but there are all these layers to get there. Communities become very aware when they're much studied as well of researchers coming in. And I think the ethical imperative of continuous engagement and re-engagement on behalf of the archivist is really important, and the repatriation process, bringing the recordings back to the communities to do with them what they want to do with them. So I really appreciate that explanation, and I think we've probably taken up quite enough of your time. I know it's evening for you.
No. I am. I'm actually in the university library here because I could not do it from anywhere. So they closed the library in 1 hour from now. It's okay.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Makwa. This was really fascinating and important work, and we really appreciate you being prepared to join us today. So I just want to thank you. And one more question I think suddenly went into the chat here. Let me just see. Julissa. Julissa, says she was wondering if you were able to talk to any of the women about how these songs of empowerment affect them, their own self-esteem, and their own identity, or the identity of children children of new single mothers, once their family have been pushed to the periphery. I think the influence of this process and of the songs on the women themselves, and how their children learn their history. So maybe just, sorry, I was going to let you go, and it was one last question here.
I'm trying to understand the question.
I think
I can clarify. Okay, hello.
Hello.
Good morning, or good afternoon for you.
Good evening, actually.
I think my question is more about if you were able to talk to any of the women on how the songs might affect their children, because your paper talks about how single mothers are pushed to the periphery, in their communities. And so I'm wondering if the songs that talk about how this happened and what happened to their property and their husbands or their support systems, how it might affect their children in being able to understand how their family is living in a different place in these displacement camps, or why their fathers might not be around. I was wondering if you were able to ask about what other effects it has beyond the mothers of these families.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julissa. Julissa, I hope I'm mentioning your name well.
Yeah, that's Julissa. Yeah, you got it.
Okay. Yeah, you have actually challenged me to think more about how the songs talk about other effects, apart from talking about the fact that many people were planning to even commit suicide. I didn't come across any song talking about the effect of the breakup of families on children. But during my interviews, some of those things came up. People could talk about how husbands ran away from them, how that has affected the raising up of children. For example, this woman talked about the fact that, she could no longer take care of the children as a single mother, especially in the camp where they were resettled, because the children had become like uncontrollable. But unfortunately, I didn't come across any songs. But now I'm going to be very curious when I go back, because you have really talked about something which I can also follow up for my future, maybe write up. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Julissa. And I think, the follow-up to that is those children learn about what happened through the songs too. So presumably how they think about their own families and their own family experiences and their fathers is also, to a certain extent, learned through those songs. So I think that is really interesting, really interesting question.
Yeah.
So thank you. I'm going to let you go before the library closes on you. Thank you again, and you and I will talk soon, I hope. So
yeah, thank you so much. And
thank you. I'm going to ask everyone else stay on the Zoom call, please. So.
Yeah, I love you all. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah.
You able to